What's the one thing you thought could never happen to you, but did? Story 1. I was 51. I had the day off and was feeling great. Decided to take an afternoon nap. As soon as my head hit the pillow, I had a massive heart attack that destroyed 40% of my heart. I woke up 3 days later on a ventilator and had no idea what the heck happened. Wow, that's scary. How long were you down for before someone found you and called for help? Before I was out, I screamed for my wife. The rescue squad was close by, but the closest hospital with full cardiac care was 35 minutes away. I found out I coded multiple times while being transported, but they were able to shock me back each time. That type of heart attack is often called a widowmaker. This happened 11 years ago, and even though I now have congestive heart failure, I'm grateful for every bonus day I've been given. Unfun fact of the day: the LAD, left anterior descending, also known as the widowmaker, has a 12% survival rate. One time there was a patient on the other side of our unit. I was in the ICU and he was in the PCU, but I could see his monitor from the ICU. He went into torsades, a polymorphic ventricular tachycardia. I grabbed his nurse and we ran to the room together. We took one look at him and we knew. I screamed, "Call a code!" and grabbed the crash cart. We got him back and shipped him off to a hospital with a cardiac cath lab. He has total occlusion of his LAD, which had just been admitted to the floor with chest pain on a nitro drip when he coded. The primary nurse had just left the room after chatting with him. I never found out what happened to him, but I think he ended up being okay, as in not dying. I think about him often. My first LAD was about 3 in the morning. I woke up and wasn't feeling well. I went to the bathroom and peed. I went to the kitchen, got a cup of water, and walked back into the bedroom, and that is when it hit me, and I started to realize what was happening. I woke up my wife and said, "Don't panic, but I think I'm having a heart attack." She replied, "Huh?" I said again, "I think I'm having a heart attack," and she responded, "Oh, okay. So what do you want to do?" I replied that I was telling her so that in the morning when she found my body, she would have an idea of what happened. It finally sunk in what I was telling her. Luckily, we lived less than 1 block from a heart hospital and she drove me there. I know, bad idea. And I was in the ER being prepped within 5 minutes. I was 28 earlier this year, was getting ready for work in the morning and had back pain from sleeping wrong. So I laid down to pop my back with one of those foam roller things, stood back up and collapsed back forward onto the floor, woke up 2 hours later and decided to not go to the ER. Slept all day, woke up the next morning and felt even worse and went into the ER. Sure enough, I had all the signs of having suffered a heart attack. What's more, they said that my fainting episode the previous August was also probably a heart attack. Was in the hospital for about a week, then on bed rest with regular outpatient visits for about 6 weeks. Still slowly getting used to my new normal. It sucks. To add insult to injury, I gained a bunch of weight while on bed rest or reduced activity for the entire spring. And now my doctor's breathing down my neck for me to lose a bunch of weight that I didn't have this time last year, roughly a 15% increase in body weight overall. Story 2. So I'm at the bus stop when this older lady asks for directions to the hospital. I decide to walk her there, and we chat. Turns out she's a famous author in disguise, researching for her next book. Fast forward, and she thanks me, and a few months later, her book drops. I checked it out, and there's my name in the acknowledgements. Never thought helping someone out would land me a shout-out in a best-selling novel. Life is wild, man. Story 3. My husband is dying. Walked into our bedroom and found him unconscious in bed. He'd been there all day. I just thought he was sleeping the day away since he'd been working so hard for days before. He was not sleeping. I just knew something was off as soon as I stepped into the room. I called his name multiple times and then I touched him. Ice cold. I will never forget that moment. Found my wife cold on the floor when I got home from work 4 years ago. Still struggling. I am better in a lot of ways, but 4 years later I still reach across the bed some mornings. My late husband. He looked like he was asleep, but I knew that he wasn't. I knew that as soon as I walked over to him, it would be real. So I just stood there and watched him for a long time, waiting for him to move, but he didn't. It's been 23 years, but that seems like yesterday sometimes. It's so hard when it feels brand new. All the feelings rushed in and take your breath away. My sincere condolences. I did the same when my mom passed. She was sitting in her chair looking like she was sleeping. I made coffee quietly and then went to make a fire in our wood stove, and when I knelt down, the hair on the back of my neck stood up as I realized she wasn't breathing. I knew she was gone, but I continued making a fire out of muscle memory or something, just to delay confirming what I knew to be true. The moments right after were so hard. I'm so thankful it was a weird work day for me because I was home late enough in the morning that I was the one who found her. If I had gone to work at my usual time, my son would have been the one. I was sitting with my mom when she took her last breath. She had been dying for days, so I had been there with her. But I just knew when that last breath came out, it was her last. I looked at my dad and reached for the pulse ox and said, "I think she's gone." I put the pulse ox on her finger to see if it would pick up a heartbeat at all. It didn't. It's a weird experience to see your loved one leave. Got shivers reading this. That's exactly how my grandmother described it when my grandfather died. I was 10 and I still remember her at dinner with our family that night, telling us how in the middle of the night he was restless. Told her his back hurt, then went downstairs to sit on the couch so as to not keep her up. The next morning, she came down to him seemingly asleep on the couch. It was early and she assumed he had been up all night, so she quietly made coffee and toast and went back upstairs to let him sleep. When she came back downstairs in the late morning, she was surprised to find him still asleep and knelt down and touched his hand to wake him up. This was in 2007. My grandmother passed away in 2013. But all these years later, I can still hear her voice saying, "His hand, it was as cold as ice. When I touched his forehead, he was so cold. So cold." The exact same thing happened to my dad. He woke up to go out on the couch, and the dog fell asleep on him and died in the middle of the night. His wife found him the next morning. The dog was still with him, curled up on his chest. I have an elderly cat who I've had as a kitten since I myself was also young. He's always loved curling up on my chest or clinging to my arm whenever I lie in bed. When it's his time to go, I hope he will be in a comfortable place. But I do sometimes fear the thought of waking up one morning and giving my little old boy a kiss between the ears only to not get a response. Story 4. Getting laid off unexpectedly after years of loyalty to my company. It was a wake-up call about job security and the need to always be prepared. I was there for almost 15 years. There were layoffs happening, but I was naive and thought that my reputation would get me by. I had heard there was a D-Day coming. If you made it through to the other side, you were good. I made it through, and then got the call. Oh, there was a second secret list. I learned that reputation, hard work, and loyalty don't matter. All that matters is the salary sitting next to your name on someone's spreadsheet, more likely someone who has never even met you. The same thing happened to me. It was a huge slap in the face, but it taught me a valuable lesson that employers genuinely don't give a crap about you. Don't work unpaid overtime, don't work on your days off for free. None of that matters to your employer when it's time to lay people off. One week I got a bonus and a thanks for doing an outstanding job. The next week I was laid off. It was a couple of weeks before Christmas. My wife was due with our baby on the holiday as well. Unemployment was delayed. They told me I'd been an underperforming worker or was fired with cause. I had the bonus and thank you to prove that was a lie. I never thought I would come home to my pregnant wife with the news that I'd been laid off. I felt crazy. Turns out the 2 weeks before birth and 6 weeks that I stayed home after were the best of my life. I never would have taken that time off financially. It worked out. I started a job the week after our savings ran out and we ended up doing all right. The exact same thing happened to my husband. He got fired 2 days before my induction from the company we both worked at, for no good reason. We both spent 4 months with our new baby that we wouldn't have otherwise. And we'll never get that time back, so it worked out. I'm still mad at the company though, and looking for another job personally. That would be shocking. I'm so sorry. Not that employers owe us anything, but when an employer can time things to avoid creating a catastrophe, I think they should. Glad it worked out. I got to support my wife. She was able to rest a lot more than most new moms. She got to focus on bonding, feeding, and sleeping. I changed almost all the diapers the first few weeks, so she could have some time to herself. On the other side of this, I worked at a place that was huge on documented processes and policies. The idea being that if something happened to an individual, another person could easily step in and do their job. The problem was my job was pretty technical and niche, and required a lot of interpretation of ambiguous specifications which only years of experience could teach. My department was an entry to the field, which management tended to conflate with being an entry-level position. All this to say, after several years I asked for a promotion or raise and it was denied. I then put in my notice, and the company panicked, as it was hard to replace my experience and I was fulfilling 2.5 roles. My departure led to a cascade of resignations, and that department went from 8 years average tenure to less than 1 year. October 2022. I woke up early to check my banking account as it was payday, and I always get anxious on payday. Huh, weird. It says $2,300, but it's following a negative sign, so negative $2,300, not the actual amount. I check with HR on their website for my paycheck stub, and everything looks off. I can't use the site like I usually can. Weird. Get to work and ask if everyone else got paid. They check. Yep, they got paid. Weird. My best friend assures me it's just a payroll screw-up. Says it happened to him one time and they'll just give me a paper check. I'm slightly reassured, but still very uneasy. I email HR about my check and they tell me to see the head of payroll after my shift is over. Why when my shift is over? No answer. F this, if they're gonna fire me, let's just get it over with. Marching down to the head of payroll, he says, "Hey bud, let's go talk to your manager." Go to my manager, he tells me I'm the best employee he's ever had, he's a huge fan, but times are tough. Walk out with 6 months severance. The funny part, 6 months later, they hired me back. Life is weird. Story 5. My wife died in a car accident. She was on her way home from work. A truck ran a stop sign. She hit him and died. I talked to her less than 5 minutes prior to the crash. Tomorrow isn't promised, guys. Tell the people you care about how much they mean to you. Hold them close. Lost my sister when her car died on the highway. A bunch of cars sped around her, but some a-hole speeding and whipping around cars hit her. She was 28. While a piece of me is forever missing, I love harder than ever and make sure everyone in my life knows how loved they are. Story 6. I got fat. When you're slim/fit pretty much your whole life, you take it for granted in many ways. It was very easy, at least it was for me, to fall into a rut of bad habits for a variety of reasons. And now I'm in a place where I've got a decent amount of weight to lose and I feel like I'm back at square one when it comes to fitness. If you don't use it, you can, in fact, lose it. Yes, I thought I was fat as a teenager, but I look at pictures now and see firsthand what teenage insecurity means and how insane I was. I was tiny. Aging, bad habits, PCOS, thyroid issues, and a lot of antidepressants and antipsychotics later, and I'm now exactly what I felt like I was 10 years ago. It's just crazy to see small mannequins in stores and stuff and be like, I would literally fit into that not too long ago, and now it looks like baby clothes. We had such a warped sense of body image as teens. I was so incredibly thin I was almost considered underweight. Now I've gained so much weight I don't feel like myself. I was 120 in high school at 5'9". My normal after high school and through my 20s was around 135 to 145. Now I'm at 190 and I don't even know how I got here. Yup, I really wish people had told me earlier that a sedentary lifestyle can catch up with you, even if you've been thin for most of your life. In a way, it's funny because I personally feel no one who's ever been even a little fat has been allowed to not think about diet and exercise. It seems like something only a lifelong skinny person could blithely walk past. The rest of us are pretty relentlessly hit with messaging, if not receiving outright abuse. I genuinely can't imagine not being aware. I never struggled as a child or teenager. I ate a lot because I was always very active. I was in organized sports and hated hanging out at home. Always wanted to be out and be free from the feeling of being trapped by my very loving but slightly overbearing family. But then, after high school, I moved out, started having to cook for myself and was free to be free in my own space, so why did I need to go out? I was poor, so I didn't do any organized sports, but I still ate like I did when I was active. That plus birth control, depression, loneliness, and before becoming pregnant, I was a whopping 250 pounds. It's been a struggle not to overgain during my pregnancy. I just hope to God I can find a way to work it off eventually. I used to be a high-level competitive swimmer traveling for international meets and preparing for the Beijing 2008. I was incredibly fit. I then stopped swimming and settled into a sedentary type of lifestyle. Years later, I'm relatively overweight. I work a desk job for the government and work from home. I sat down for hours every day, but a few months ago, I bought a stand-up desk and a desk treadmill. I walk between 7 and 9 kilometers every workday, usually between 26K to 30K plus steps at 6 to 6.5 hours, burning around 1,300 calories each day. In a few months, I've dropped 20 pounds. I've only recently made a bigger change to my diet and am losing weight quicker now. I've got about another 20 or 30 pounds to go. I'm still lazy. I don't want to go to the gym after work or something, so walking with the occasional push-up/sit-up or weight session during my workday is perfect, as I can be a lump after work. Story 7. Being in a domestically violent relationship. It's surreal how it happens too. Everyone seems to think you argue one day and they just knock you out, but sometimes it creeps up and they almost desensitize you. Punching a wall when they're angry. Okay, it's nothing, we can patch it up. A small push? It's nothing. Grabbing your arms while you argue? It's nothing. Throwing my cat against the wall during an argument? What the hell? Suddenly strangling me when I try to leave? I was so young and I kept thinking, wait, how did I get here? Of course everyone else could see it and how bad the small things were. This gave me goosebumps. My late fiancé was slowly but surely desensitizing me into the same way you described until one night he threw me around while I was 6 months pregnant, after I caught him cheating, and told me, "I hope this moment haunts you for the rest of your life," and proceeded to punch 7 holes in the wall on his way to the living room, where he shot himself in the head with a rifle. I never saw it coming, but looking back, I feel like I should have. I'm just so thankful I got out alive. I literally spent my college years working at a domestic violence shelter, while I was with the man who would eventually abuse me. The worst part is that it took me until I had moved out for over a year before I accepted that it was a DV situation. His telling he wished he could get away with killing me didn't tip me off. Putting his hands around my throat and pushing me on the ground was just him being mad. Throwing things and putting holes in the walls was totally fine. I mean, he said he was sorry. I never thought it would happen to me, and it's still surreal that it did. At some point in the beginning, they reel you in with their charm. I was always trying to get back to that with him. The good times. They became so few. They reel you back in with apologizing, gifts, or whatever manipulation they can come up with. Abusers are all the same. Very predictable behavior. It's just different flavors of horrid behavior. When you're in the thick of it though, it can be so hard to see. You're just trying to love them. You're also terrified of them. My abuser's ex is 100% screwed in the head. It has been a long time, but if I ever see him in the news for murder, I will not be shocked at all. It was years into therapy when, in one session, it broke upon me all at once that my ex-husband had abused me. That I was a battered woman in recovery. It sounds crazy, but it's like my brain wouldn't let me have the full realization until I was at a safe enough distance or something. It was only walls and possessions, not my face, so I couldn't have been abused, right? It was only swerving into oncoming traffic or taking exits and turns at high speeds while screaming at me, not broken ribs. It was just kink, not a screen for his need to sexually abuse or control me. It was just jokes, not cruel and demeaning language intended to chip away at the very core of my being. I felt ashamed for a long time, like I was somehow complicit in the abuse, like I gaslit myself and thereby abandoned myself. It's heavy stuff, man. I'm so much better and happier now, and I have an incredible partner that matches me in values, and I will never abandon myself again. Even so, I think a part of my psyche will always be in a state of shock that it happened to me. Story 8. Suffering from anorexia and recovering from anorexia. We watched an eating disorder documentary in school, and I remember seeing footage of people in the hospital crying over having to eat chips and thinking, what the fuck is wrong with them? A few years later, being in and out of eating disorder units was the next 15 years of my life. I was so entrenched I thought I'd never recover. Hell, I had consultants tell me I'd be a revolving door patient for the rest of my life. As I was leaving my last hospital admission, the consultant told me he'd see me back in a month. That was 5 years ago. It was not smooth sailing, but I'm in full recovery now, with a full-time job I love, able to enjoy life and eat freely. The life of hospitals is a distant memory. Eating disorders are some of the hardest to recover from. They have a lower rate of successful recovery than alcoholism or drug abuse. I can understand why the consultant was so cynical, but I want to sincerely congratulate you on your hard-won victory. You're amazing. Don't forget that. The same thing happened to me, but with binge eating. I remember watching a coworker eat 4 hamburgers in one meal with a 64-ounce soda and feeling sick to my stomach. How could she possibly do such a thing? Then, like a year later, that was me. Sneaking food, constantly stuffing my face the moment no one was looking. I even ate my roommate's food out of the trash. Fortunately, I had access to therapy, and the whole ordeal lasted less than 2 years. I was on the brink of developing diabetes. I'd wake up in the morning with distorted vision from high blood sugar. I am mostly beyond my ED, bulimia, where I purged by withholding insulin as a type 1 diabetic, or at least as beyond as I can ever be. I wish I had been brave enough to get help when I was younger. I have probably done irreparable damage to my body. But we're keeping a watch on things. So far, I have been extremely lucky. Cheers to surviving. I thought anorexia and bulimia would kill me. They came close. I thought I'd be one of the patients I saw in and out of the hospital forever until they died, which many of them did in a few years. I was at my sickest. I thought I'd need a freaking lobotomy to stop the endless parade of numbers and compulsive binge purge planning in my head 24/7. Felt like my whole self had rotted out like a hollow tree, and I was just waiting for the surface to cave in. Now I'm 12 years out from my last hospitalization and have a job and 2 kids who are my world. I eat like a normal person and usually feel pretty great about it all. It's so possible. I wish someone had told me how possible it was. I felt hopeless for a long time. The same thing happened to me. I remember watching a documentary with my mom about a girl with anorexia, thinking this would never happen to me because I love food so much. A year later, I was watching an update on this girl who had recovered while at the worst of my struggle with anorexia. I have now been in recovery for 10 years, and life is life, and I'm glad I get to live it. Congratulations on your recovery. Story 9. Getting a really serious case of pneumonia as an active, healthy 40-year-old. I went from feeling a bit ill and developing a cough to a coma in intensive care on life support in just 3 days. Spent 5 weeks in a coma with a full lung, and then kidney failure, and another 3 doing physio and recovering. Not nearly as serious as your case, but 36 years old and in decent enough health. I also got really serious pneumonia this past February. I ended up in the hospital for 3 days, had some wild levels and was scared out of my mind, had 2 infectious disease doctors probing at me and running every test under the sun. Ultimately to determine it was serious atypical pneumonia that spread to my heart and caused a serious infection. They thought I had or was going to have an MI. Super scary. I had a very similar experience at 28. I was overworked and thought I had the flu for a couple of weeks until I passed out and luckily woke up long enough to call an ambulance. Less than 30 minutes later, I passed out again and woke up a couple of weeks later from a coma. It's been almost a decade and I haven't been the same since. Tried going back to work about 7 months later when doctors said I was physically recovered enough, but I couldn't handle my job anymore. I have a lot of trauma, brain issues, mental health issues, etc. that began with being in a coma, dying twice, etc. Wild stuff. Story 10. Bad stuff, mass shooting. Good stuff, I never thought I would get married, but we're coming up on 5 years in the fall. My dad was at the Jason Aldean concert that got shot up in Vegas. It's the largest non-government mass shooting in US history now. He was there with a coworker while in Vegas on business. He works in the entertainment industry, and they left to get some food about 10 minutes before the shooting started. He was in the food court by the aquarium when the first shots were fired, meaning that the shooter was between him and the crowd. But it was still scary. The first I heard about it was him marking himself safe on Facebook. An ex-girlfriend of mine from many years before was on Route 91. I followed her on Instagram and saw her post all types of fun pics, until the shooting. When the news broke about the shooting, I was deeply concerned about her safety. I reached out immediately, letting her know I was there for her if she needed anything. She didn't respond. I found out her friend was killed. She was okay and narrowly escaped. She responded to my message weeks later saying she'd love to see me. We're now 5 years married with our second kid on the way. I credit this tragedy with the birth of my child and rekindled the love of my life. Story 11. Got attacked by an entire swarm of killer bees on top of a mountain. Almost fell off the mountain running down the trail and nearly considered jumping in my panic. Was raking bees out of my hair as they tried to get to my scalp and had to cover my face with my shirt to prevent them from climbing into my face holes. I thought I was gonna die. Got pretty scraped up and stung as I clawed my way down the trail without stopping. I never knew the sound of a swarm could be so loud and terrifying. I had nightmares for weeks after. Another hiker in the same area had been attacked by killer bees a few years prior, and they stayed on his body for 8 hours, preventing rescuers from recovering his body. I now have extreme fear of flying insects. When I was living the commune life, one of my roommates decided we should get bees and ask for forgiveness if the neighbors found out. I supported this. None of us knew how to keep bees, and we're all in our individual stages of youthful hedonism. We didn't think the colony would expand as fast as they did, but they soon formed a thriving society. Of course, we forgot to build them a bigger box to live in, and that thriving society became angry. Cue a few weeks later, and I'm hitting the dab rig on a hot summer day while listening to Earthless, and I hear this buzzing. Thinking my sweet new speakers were shot, I got up to see what was wrong with them. I pass my open window and see it. The bees have formed a large cloud and are leaving the box to look for bigger prospects. They are bounding down the street, headed for the main intersection in our urban residential neighborhood. I close the window, and before I can say, "Oh crap," 3 of our neighbors are screaming and banging at our door, completely devoid of the forgiveness we were hoping for. Long story short, I had to get up, put on my hood, and grab the smoker to corral them back to the box with my other 4 roommates. It was, as they say, a real buzzkill. Too real, actually. The city got on our asses hard after that, and we wound up giving the bees to another beekeeper, where they lived the rest of their bee lives doing bee stuff for bee reasons. Somehow we were not evicted. My son and I got attacked by a swarm. We were standing on the deck by my pond, just playing in our backyard. He was 3 at the time and was going up and down the 2 steps over and over as kids do. All of a sudden, he started screaming and running in circles on the lawn by the dock, and I thought there were giant ants all over him because he wouldn't sit still. It wasn't until I grabbed him that I realized they were yellow jackets, probably about 20 at the time. I scraped them off my son, ripped his clothes off because they were getting stuck in and under his shirt and shorts, and told him to run to my dad in the house and not wait for me. I remember watching him run away, but he slowed down to look back, and I screamed, "Run! Do not look back! Leave me!" And as soon as I ripped his clothes off, they were all over me. The whole nest came after me, probably 50 or 60 at least. They had built a massive nest under the stairs of the deck. I started running, but they were stinging me through my pants and shirt rapidly, and trying to get to my face and head. I would swipe 20 off of me, run a few steps, look down, and there would be 30 back instead. It was horrifying. I ended up ripping my pants and top off and throwing it behind me while I ran for the door wall. They attacked my clothes instead of me, thankfully. I ran into the house half naked maybe 30 seconds after my son. I got stung about 15 times, but my son had been stung over 30 times. He ended up being okay. We both did, but he's genuinely afraid of anything that looks like a bee now. Story 12. Bird poop hit me in the mouth while driving once. I pulled over and insta-vommed, called my boss and told her I would be late. I was interning at a bank at the time. She told me to take the day off and also get a lottery ticket. Apparently getting pooped on by a bird is good luck. Anywho, I bought 2 $1 scratch-offs and won $50 on both. My grandma lived close by, so I showered there. I scratched the tickets while smoking a cigarette with her in the kitchen. Good memory. Birds love to poop on me. One time my friend was trying to show me something on his mobile. As I reach out to grab it, birds poop perfectly on my hand. Or the time when we were 7 people walking together, I lifted my hat for maybe 2 seconds to scratch my head as a bird pooped on my head. The closest call to what you have was when I was 12, playing soccer with a bunch of people. I trip and fall down, roll onto my back to try to get up, and a bird poops on my face. Luckily, only my cheek. Never won the lottery though. Story 13. In 1996 or so, I went to my wife's company Christmas party. While there, a candle got close to some of the table decorations, and I put out the small fire with 2 to 3 napkins dipped in a water glass. I never expected to do this at least 2 more times, each at formal banquets, each with a candle igniting decorations. In the most recent 2018, I put out a small fire with iced tea, not water, and did not break the discussion. Story 14. A tornado damaged my roof while I was trying to sell my house. 2 years later, the next house burned down. 6 months after that, a massive ice storm dropped 4 trees and completely crushed the next house. In that same year, I took an antibiotic that destroyed my connective tissue. My husband got 3rd-degree burns in the house fire, my son got bit by a copperhead snake, my grandfather died of COVID, and my car caught fire. I've learned to never ever assume that something won't happen to you. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now,